Channel open. Welcome back to Weekly Trek, a Star Trek news podcast presented by TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on March 28th, 2026, and is current through Star Trek Starfleet Academy Season 1, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
Weekly Trek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in the Alex Kurtzman-Era of Star Trek, though who knows for how much longer, with the 12th television show currently in production and 14 movies to enjoy, and merchandise continuing to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and this week I'm joined by two returning guests. It's Thad Hait and Caleb Dorsch. Thad and Caleb, welcome back to Weekly Trek.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be on board.
Well, today's episode is a little different from our usual format, and a new style of episode I'm launching for big news events that deserve a whole show to themselves and could benefit from a larger discussion. Sometimes there is a Star Trek news story that potentially tells us something larger about the state of the Star Trek franchise, and I think that's true this week. So we're ditching what we're feeling good about Star Trek this week, and we'll go straight into talking about the news of the week and what it means for the future of Star Trek on television. So with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
Well, on Monday, March 23rd, Variety broke the news that Star Trek Starfleet Academy, which had just finished filming its second season in Toronto, Canada in the last few weeks, had been cancelled and will end with Season 2. The news was accompanied by a letter from the Starfleet Academy showrunners, Alex Kurtzman and Noga Landau. It has been mine and Noga's joy and privilege to help carry Gene Roddenberry's extraordinary vision forward with Starfleet Academy, thanks to the hundreds of hardworking humans who pour every ounce of their talents into the work daily with imagination and reverence. We're in post-production now on what will be the second and final season. We're so proud of what we've accomplished together on this show, and the world will get to see the work of these extraordinary artists when Season 2 airs. We will finish strong. Whether you're working on Star Trek or part of the marvel that is the Star Trek fandom, its very heart, soul, and conscience, the joy comes from adventuring across boundaries of time, space, and the humanly possible in service to Roddenberry's transformative vision of the future. That incomparable vision was fueled by an inexhaustible optimism. Star Trek places its bets on the best in human nature. It dares to imagine a society of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, free of war, hate, poverty, disease, and repression, and dedicated to the spirit of scientific inquiry and respect for all life, whether carbon or silicon-based, green-skinned or blue. But make no mistake, Gene Roddenberry wasn't some starry-eyed dreamer. He was a decorated Army bomber pilot in the Pacific Theater. He had seen firsthand the grim consequences of the worst of human nature, and his vision of the future wasn't just a promise of hope, it was also a warning. In a fraught, frightening time of intolerance and violence, Star Trek said, look, we made it, but just barely. First, we had to put all of those ancient scourges behind us. It said that what makes us glorious as a species and gives us hope for the future and the galaxy is inextricably linked to what makes us dangerous to each other, to this one world we presently inhabit, and to ourselves. That dual message of hope and of warning isn't just a pretty dream, but a call to action, to think about who we are in a different way. Please don't take our word for it, take Gene's. Star Trek was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins not just to tolerate, but to take a special delight in differences in ideas and differences in life forms. If we cannot learn to actually enjoy those small differences, to take a positive delight in those small differences between our own kind here on this planet, then we do not deserve to go out into space and meet the diversity that is almost certainly out there. With enduring hope that his vision of the future is possible for our children, their children, and every future cadet in Starfleet Academy, live long and prosper. Well, with the news that Starfleet Academy has been cancelled, there are no ongoing Star Trek television projects in production, as Strange New Worlds and SFA are now both in post-production on their final seasons. And as we discussed in previous weeks, while Alex Kurtzman indicated his negotiations about his own future shepherding the Star Trek franchise are continuing, with all the Kurtzman-era shows now having been cancelled, is this the end of the Kurtzman-era of Star Trek? Well, Caleb and Thad, let's first start with just talking about Starfleet Academy and the news about its cancellation. What's your reaction to the news that Starfleet Academy will not be coming back after Season 2?
I'm mad. This is not the first time you've had me on to ask my reaction to the cancellation of a Star Trek show. I am less mad about this than I was about Prodigy, because at the time with Prodigy, they were shelving it and we weren't even getting the final season. But from a personal standpoint, I have loved this show. I think it's my favorite and again, the recency bias playing a part here, but I think it's my favorite live action show from the Kurtzman era. I wanted this show to continue to go on to spread its wings, get even better, and run for the full 4 years of school.
I'm equally as mad. I actually think I'm probably about as mad, if not more mad, than Prodigy, unlike you, Thad.
Okay.
I think I had hope that Walt Key and crew would shop around and make a deal. And, I guess in hindsight, like that worked out for them. But I think I'm more mad because it doesn't feel like that's even an opportunity here to shop around and do another rounds on another service somewhere. It seems like it's dead in the water. And I think, like you, this is quickly becoming one of my favorites of this particular era. I'm a huge Discovery fan, and I don't know if it quite beats Discovery yet, but I really loved the format of all the episodes this year. There certainly is a lot of things that were kind of silly about the show, but I think the humor worked really well for the group of cadets it was showing us. And I really thought the story format found a really good balance that felt like TNG in its early days. And I think that was really cool. We didn't really get that a whole lot with some of the other shows. They tried to do a lot of different things with the format of Discovery. They did a lot character focused with Picard, and then Strange New Worlds has been genre focused, and so they've just been trying a lot of different things, and this is the first time it's felt like they went back to something that works but are doing it in a new way with a new cast, and not reveling in the nostalgia, but using the past as an anchor that makes our main characters move forward. And I thought that was really cool. So this really sucks because I thought it was a great first season. I thought the second season had only potential to go up from there. And, there's also the news that we got that there's a cliffhanger that was planned for the end of the season. And so it now feels like we're waiting for a season 2 of a show that will have an unsatisfactory ending. And that really doesn't sit well with me. At least with Prodigy, season 1 had an ending to its story. And you were not going to get that here. So I think I'm more mad than I am about Prodigy.
Yeah, it sucks big time. I think a lot of what you both said resonates really strongly with me. It did really feel like Starfleet Academy had, for me, figured out the right balance between the different kinds of Star Trek shows in terms of it wasn't sort of classically episodic like a legacy show or like Strange New Worlds, but it also wasn't like highly serialized like Discovery and Picard. And it did sort of like had that nice balance between having stories that ran through the show that were largely pretty low stakes, take the sort of season finale aside. They were relatively low stakes stories that were sort of like running in the background of whatever the kind of main thing that they were doing that week was. And I thought that was a really kind of good take on what modern Star Trek could be in this world of television being the way that it is right now. And the fact that they're only going to have 2 seasons to tell this story and not 4 seasons, that they are going to end on a cliffhanger. It's all highly unsatisfying, and it's sort of just like a highly unsatisfying way for this period of the Star Trek franchise, whether Alex Kurtzman sticks around or not, to ultimately end. I mean, for like 4 years now, this has been the show that was gonna be the next big thing for the franchise, the place they were putting all their time and their energy and their money. And just as quickly as it's arrived, it's been shuffled off the, shuffled off the stage. And that, I mean, I think that says a lot about Paramount, and it says a lot maybe about Star Trek as a whole, but just regardless of any of that, it just sucks.
Absolutely.
I think there's another thing too, which is like, I feel like a lot of the conventional wisdom about this show that's kind of sort of playing out online around its popularity is not really backed up by information. I mean, we sort of have been... The show gets cancelled, and now the conventional wisdom about the show is nobody watched it. And while it didn't make the Nielsen top 10 streaming rankings, that does not necessarily mean that the show was significantly less popular than some of the other Star Trek shows that there have been, given, like, if you sort of, like, those top 10 rankings are the top 10, right? So if you fall 1 million minutes below the top 10, you're not going to be included. And if, like, I've kept track of every episode of Star Trek that's ended up on the top 10, and a bunch of these episodes that did end up on the top 10 would not have ended up in the top 10 during the run of Starfleet Academy, because there were other shows that were getting a lot more popularity. So, like, if you look at the show with the least amount watched that made it to the top 10 was the Star Trek Discovery Season 5 episode Face the Strange. It got 241 million minutes. That would not have showed up on the Nielsen top 10 over the last 6 or 7 weeks that Academy's been on, while the top 10 have been listed. Janal, 257 million minutes. That wouldn't have charted. Life Itself, 269 million minutes. That wouldn't have charted. Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 9, Vox, 276 million minutes. That wouldn't have charted. Star Trek Discovery Mirrors, 285 million minutes. That wouldn't have charted. Strange New Worlds Hegemony, 304 million minutes. That would have charted. Basically, anything below, like, 350 over the last 6 or 7 weeks wouldn't have charted. And so it could easily be a show that's sitting in the 250 to 300 range, which sort of puts it alongside Discovery Season 5. Picard only hit the top 10 3 times. No Win Scenario with 310, Vox with 276, and then The Last Generation with 400. And so while it's not as popular as Strange New Worlds Seasons 2 and 3 episodes got Shuttle to Kenfori, got 472 million minutes. Space Adventure Hour got 397. Those Old Scientists got 395. Ad Astra Per Aspera got 393. Like, those would have all charted pretty easily. So it's not like, it was not Strange New Worlds popular, but it was maybe Discovery and Picard popular. But the way everybody talks about it, they talk about it like it was like nobody was watching it at all. And I don't think that's fair. And I think that's kind of a really crappy thing to accuse the show of when there isn't the evidence of that.
I agree with you, Alex. And I thank you for bringing up the data, because I think that's really good perspective to keep when we do the math on that. The average episode, at least for those other shows, was in the 45 to 50 minute range. A couple times that's 60 minutes an episode. When you do that math, we're talking about somewhere between 5 and 6 million Star Trek fans, right? When we're actually dividing that by the episode runtime. And that's assuming everyone watched it through once. Some people watch it multiple times, so it might even be less than that. This fandom is not as big as it thinks it is, and I think that's part of it. But at the same time, all of these Starfleet Academy episodes were longer. They were pretty much 60 minutes a piece. And yeah, if people are only watching it once through, at best, right, it would be still about 6 million people watching it. And it does matter what it's up against. You're running against other shows that have way more demand, way more popularity. And I think on top of that, I don't think the marketing did it any favors. I think the marketing for this show was a failed opportunity to bring more fans in and keep existing fans. A lot of people went into this with a sour viewpoint, thinking it would be terrible. And I think a lot of people made up their minds based on the poster before they even got there, So I think that perspective is really good to think about. But I also saw a lot of data about Amazon, like the Amazon streaming minutes. And I think that matters more in other countries, but it was pretty consistently in the top 10 on Amazon. So I think that it's very hard to make that claim that nobody watched it when there's not enough data to really represent that, right? And so I think it is a good point, but it's frustrating because you're like, well, people have been watching it. The conversations have still been happening about it. And I think when it was canceled, I think it was either an interview with Kurtzman or someone from Trek Movie interviewed an insider that had basically said the show actually did better than expected. And I think that was probably based on the early polling after the outcry from the posters and stuff. What that number actually is, we'll never know. But I'm surprised that the show did better than expected and still got the axe. So I'm sitting here wondering what's going on that even contributed to this decision.
I will say, obviously, this is very clearly, a biased audience, but I have been on the Star Trek cruise for 6 times. I've been on the Star Trek cruise when Discovery was airing, like actively during a season, when Picard was actively during a season, and when Academy was actively during a season. And other than Picard season 3, none of the buzz for the currently airing show came close to the talk about Academy on the cruise and I don't mean the programming, I mean just people talking about it in general.
In some ways, I don't even think the marketing is to blame personally. I mean, they could always do a better job of marketing Star Trek for sure, but marketing any kind of entertainment franchise in this current, like, massively diffuse media environment, I think it's just really difficult, and it's really difficult to get right. And some shows and movies hit really big, but I don't think there's like a playbook you can follow anymore to make that happen. I think there's just sort of an alchemy to that people don't really have a good sense of like what it is or how it functions. To me, I think the big area where the show was, through no fault of its own, hurt was the very initial reaction to the first episode of the show from the likes of Elon Musk and Stephen Miller, because being on Paramount Plus, Starfleet Academy is not a show that you're just going to stumble across. It's a show that you have to actively seek out. And it felt like the viewership proposition behind it that Kurtzman and crew were putting forward, because this has obviously been Kurtzman's whole modus operandi for the Star Trek franchise over the last 10 years, is gotta try and make a new show that reaches beyond the 5 to 6 million Star Trek fans who are guaranteed to watch it, right? Mm-hmm. And that, seems like why they ultimately went with Starfleet Academy rather than doing like a Star Trek Legacy, because frankly, Legacy appeals to the 5 to 6 million. It appeals to them very strongly, but like it appeals to us very strongly, but it only appeals to the 5 to 6 million. Who wants to see a group of 70 and 80-year-olds run around fighting Klingons, right? Like we do, because they're our favorite people in the world. But like for people who've never seen Star Trek before, a bunch of old people going up against, 60 years of, interconnected narrative story that's not a killer proposition for expanding, to that 7 or 8th or 9th million. Strange New Worlds seems to have accomplished that more by sort of basically being a modern take on that sort of initial Star Trek concept. But Starfleet Academy was sort of the big swing in that regard, right? Star Trek needs to go younger, and so we're doing this Academy show, and it's going to appeal to young people. And that, I think some of the backlash to the show sort of has been just like old people being like, this is not, and I count myself amongst old people, like, this is not made for me. But I do think, like, if it was trying to introduce itself to America and the world as, we'd be really interested in you watching a Star Trek show. Here's this new Star Trek show. It's pretty different than the kind of Star Trek shows we've had before and is designed for a younger audience. And so if you're a younger person, you might be interested in checking this out. We'd love for you to check it out. I think it immediately took damage right out of the gate, because you have Elon Musk posting about it, and you have Stephen Miller posting about it, and then there is just this feverish right-wing backlash towards it that I think people who might then be interested in going and checking out a Star Trek show, I don't think they're necessarily convinced by, oh, well, I don't think I want to see that kind of thing on television. I just think for a lot of regular people, there's this element of anytime something gets political, whether that's one way or the other, they just go, oh, I can't be dealing with that. There's so much politics around these days. That's not what I want from my television. I don't want something, not to say that like I wouldn't agree with the politics of the show. I'm not saying all these people, sort of are right wing or far right wing. I'm just sort of saying that like a lot of people, like, everything is so politicized at the moment and everything is so political that I think that turns off a lot of people from then saying, oh, I might check this out, because it's like, oh, I really don't want to participate in the culture war today, And if I've got to subscribe to Paramount Plus and go to Paramount Plus in order to get this thing, well, now the burden of effort is way too high for me to want to to want to scale it.
Yeah, I think Academy suffered the same problem that Prodigy had, which was it was trying to appeal to new viewers, but new viewers weren't going to find it on Paramount Plus.
Okay, well, let's step back a little bit. So, with the cancellation of all of the Kurtzman-era Star Trek projects, and with the knowledge that his contract is up for renewal this year, what do we think that means for Star Trek? Is Kurtzman finished? Caleb, what do you think?
That's the $1 million question, or multi-million contract dollar question, rather. I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's finished. It seems like the conversations are still positive, but the state of Skydance and Paramount right now is so just debt heavy, and they really don't know. Like, I guess there is a plan for where they want to take the business, but with that comes a lot of business decisions, and this feels to a degree like they did this so that they could then put everything on pause and evaluate where they want the franchise to go. And I really don't know if that includes Kurtzman or not. It's tough to say. I would think that the guy has done it for 10 years. He's had lots of projects, a variety of different projects. There was a period of time where we had 50 episodes of Star Trek in 52 weeks at the peak of what he was doing. And the quality was all pretty consistent. But I think Paramount probably needs to evaluate, how do you get more eyes on the franchise, especially one as loved as Star Trek. And maybe that doesn't mean Paramount Plus for everything. Maybe that means breaking up the franchise to some degree and putting things on CBS or shopping around to other streamers. Like, yes, Paramount Plus is going to be their main focus, but I think they are in the business of making media for consumption, and that also includes movies. So I don't know that Kurtzman's maybe the right guy for movies. Especially because the movies have been stuck in development hell for so long, and he's been focused on the TV side of things. And maybe that's the direction they want to go, is maybe they want to go for more movies instead of shows for a little while. And maybe that's going to lead them reevaluating that relationship. But I really don't know. It's anyone's guess at this point.
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion either way, but I am leaning towards this is probably not a good sign. I think it's more likely than not that Kurtzman's contract will not be renewed, just through the environment of the merger is changing a lot of things. And if they're not wanting to keep any of the shows that Kurtzman's currently making, it seems less likely they'd want to keep him on to make new shows.
I think the money piece is also really important now that you say that, because he just spent 10 years under a contract that was originally signed. What was it? It was I think a 3 or 4 year contract originally that got extended halfway through, right? And that was based on 2020 dollars. It is now 2026, where inflation has run rampant and everything's hurt by tariffs. The cost of production is way more expensive. Do you think Kurtzman financially is the move Paramount wants to make? They're going to have to pay him a lot more to steer the ship long term than they did the first time.
Right.
And maybe that's not the money move they want to make when they're already under so much debt.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I could see a world in which it's like, yeah, okay, that didn't work, but let's keep this going and see what else you got. And now you've got a different set of executives over Kurtzman and co. They're like, well, now we can sort of shepherd you in the right direction to make more successful Star Trek shows. And so we will renew. But I also feel like if this ends up being the end, I mean, the writing's pretty clearly on the wall. All right, in terms of the shows all having been cancelled, the cancellations having sort of coincided with the conclusion of the contract, having had all of this big leadership changeover at Paramount. You can't blame anybody from looking at all of that and saying, well, looks like the writing's on the wall for Alex Kurtzman, sort of despite what he says. Because I do think it is a little bit telling this week with the announcement about the cancellation. There was this letter from Alex Kurtzman and Noga Landau, but there was no statement from Paramount, right? There was no thanks very much to everybody for your service. Really appreciate it. Star Trek franchise continues, thumbs up kind of statement, and this wasn't even like a widely run news story because they had sent out a press release to all the outlets saying this is happening and here's the time at which you can post it. It was a Variety exclusive, and who knows how that ultimately came together. Maybe Variety had the story and they went to Paramount and said, you know, we've got the story and we're going to run it, that Starfleet Academy's cancelled, and Paramount came back and said, okay, let's give you we'll give you a statement about this. But it did sort of feel telling that the only comment we've gotten from production about the cancellation is from Alex Kurtzman and Noga Landau, and not from anybody at Paramount Skydance. And so, while, again, like, you know, hedging, in some ways it's like I could see the ingredients and circumstances for him continuing. Does sort of feel like it's moving in the direction of the Kurtzman-Era drawing to a close.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, like, how do you reflect on the Kurtzman-Era of Star Trek to date as a whole? Like, if you had to give it a grade, what grade would you give it? Are there things you think they did really well? Any places you think they've fallen short? Like, and obviously it's not fully complete because we're still missing 26 episodes, season 4 of Strange New Worlds, season 2 of Starfleet Academy, and season 5 of Strange New Worlds. But if this ends up being what the Kurtzman-Era is, how do you feel about it?
I mean, I'm a Star Trek fan. I like Star Trek. So I enjoyed most of the shows in the Kurtzman-Era. I think it had its highs and its lows, like anything would. Because, I mean, we had some really great Star Trek, and we also had Picard Season 2.
I think Picard Season 2 is underrated, personally.
I think the hard part of evaluating like the Kurtzman-Era versus the Berman-Era is the volume of it, right? We've always criticized this era for having too few episodes, and as a result of modern day writing standards, there has to be a different approach to a 10 episode season than a 26 episode season. I think overall there have been really high highs in this current era, and probably percentage wise way fewer lows than there would have been for the Berman era.
Agreed.
Like, if I had to actually count out all the bad episodes of Voyager and DS9 and Enterprise and TNG and take that out of the, 600 or 700 something episodes that were made at that point, I would bet you that percentage is higher than, a mathematically imperfect redemption that I despise, but Thad loves, and some aspects of Picard season 2. But like, largely, this was a really solid stretch of almost 10 years of Star Trek. I think by the time we're done, it will have hit 10 years. It would be really poetic if we were wrapping up, season 5 of Strange New Worlds on September 20-something, 2027. I don't know if the 24th is a Thursday or not, but that was, it was either the 17th or the 24th, I think, is when Discovery originally aired in 2017. So we're coming up on a decade of Star Trek, which is, yeah, the Berman era ran a little longer, but I think it has been really, really solid. I think the praise for this era is the variety, right? We've had character studies in the form of Picard. We've had a more serialized show that follows a non-captain character on their way up to captain with Discovery. You've got a comedy that was animated. You've got a kids show that was animated. You've got a Academy, which, is a live action but aimed at younger audiences. And you have an episodic Strange New Worlds, which, goes back to the original premise of Star Trek with the cage. Like, it's crazy to think that show even exists, and I think we've really been given a wealth of riches in terms of what we have had in the past 10 years. So I'm really sad to see this era go. I can't fault Kurtzman for any of the choices he's made. I think he has done a really solid job of leading this franchise and opening the door for new voices to tell stories in this franchise. I think that's one of the things that led to the fatigue of the Berman era, is it was a lot of the same voices over and over and over across multiple shows, and while I love Braga and I love Rondi Moore and I love Pillar and all of them, at a certain point you run out of ideas to keep things fresh, right? And so I think this you've had a couple of directors carry through from one show to the next, but the writer the writers' rooms have largely changed with every show. So I think that's also a really big benefit, and bringing in more voices that you wouldn't typically see in Trek. The fact that Tawny Newsome had a writing opportunity after starting out as a voice actor in Lower Decks is awesome. And she's had her own pitch for her own show, which maybe we'll see that will see the light of day eventually. I don't know. But the fact that there's just doors opening for folks that previously wouldn't have had doors opened in the 90s era Trek writers room, I think is really cool. So I think it has been an overall positive experience for the last decade.
Yeah, it very much feels like, I think, sort of to echo a lot of what you just said, Caleb, like it really does feel like they just sort of tried a lot of different things. And some of those things worked and some of those things didn't. But if you were to sort of compare and contrast the Berman era and the Kurtzman era, you've got the Berman era where the shows, like, they changed the format a little bit and they changed the uniforms, but it was largely the same writers for many years. It was largely the same behind the scenes folks. It was largely a lot of the same creatives behind the camera. You know, the musicians were the same, right? Like, there was a degree of consistency and continuity of production for 18 years of Star Trek. And by the time it hit 2005, a lot of Star Trek fans, as much as now many of those same fans look back on that period of time with rose-tinted glasses about, oh, this is when Star Trek was at its absolute height, you know, this is how things should be today. I mean, they were so bored of that version of Star Trek by the time Enterprise Season 4 rolled around that nobody was watching it anymore. And that's why it ended. And I think Kurtzman sort of brought this theory to the table that said, okay, well, if, you know, we could make a lot of the same thing and we'd probably go half the time because audience attention spans are a lot shorter. The media environment is so fractured that, like, just doing a run of 7 seasons of 26 episodes of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager is just not an achievable kind of thing. Let's try lots of different stuff. Let's try animation. Let's try comedy. Let's try the sort of deeper character study. And a lot of it worked well. Some of it didn't work that well, but, like, they were still really trying new stuff and throwing new stuff against the wall. And so I don't think it is possible to, certainly not yet, like, draw a conclusion about the sort of Kurtzman era, and one, its impact on the Star Trek franchise as a whole, and two, just sort of how successful is it, because they tried stuff, and I think that's going to help, you know, future, if this is the end of the Kurtzman era and another era is opening, it will help future creatives kind of understand both what are the successful parts of the Star Trek franchise to walk down, but also what are maybe the avenues that you shouldn't bother kind of, you know, playing around with or trying for. And ultimately, like, I do think there's just going to be this really interesting question going forward, which is Star Trek being made for the 5 to 6 million, you know, sort of Star Trek fans who are holdovers from the 90s and 2000s, or are they trying to make something to appeal for a new audience? Kurtzman has definitely been in the make something that appeals to a new audience category definitively across all of the choices that have been made throughout the Kurtzman era. But, you know, you could see a new regime say, well, maybe the goal is here just to get as much value out of the 5 to 6 million as we can while they're still alive and spending money. You know?
Yeah, I think the question really has to be, how do you get more eyes on Star Trek at this point? Because looking at those numbers, right, I would say consistently across 10 years, it's at least 5 to 6 million fans, right? The 5 to 6 million might change a little bit depending on the type of show. It might go up a little bit. You know, like Strange New Worlds was a little bit broader reaching, but at the end of the day, it is paywalled behind Paramount Plus, which is still one of the cheaper platforms. But when you look at the buffet of content to choose from on Netflix or Apple TV or Peacock or, you know, any of those other ones, HBO, you know, it really is. Yeah. I know it's been a hard sell for the past 10 years, I think, to get people to sign up for Paramount Plus. With this new merger, yeah, there could be more eyes on it, but what show do you put out there and start fresh with in order to do that? And I know we've heard pitches about Star Trek Year One, but I don't know that that's the right show to do it either.
I don't think it is.
I think you need to try something like Academy again and get younger people interested in it. I mean, I have a couple of students who told me they started watching Star Trek for the first time and they started with Academy. And so, like, I think that probably did work to some degree, but you also have to recognize that a lot of kids don't watch shows week to week. They pick a show and binge it. Like, they are very much voracious in their methods of watching stuff. I mean, there are time periods where kids are at lunch binging old shows on their phones, at my school. And that's what I see. Like, I actually have students who are watching Vampire Diaries right now. That show's been done for years. They're going back and watching older things. And I think that, is really interesting because it means that the attention span to wait week to week for something that's stretched out rather than watch it all at once, I think that is a big viewership difference between old and young. And I think maybe that's a different release approach they might want to consider in the future for whatever they bring out next. Is maybe you drop half the season at once. Maybe you drop the full season at once and have all 10 episodes available. Does that have the constant, daily active users on the app that they are looking for? Probably not. But does it bring more eyes over a period of time? Probably yes. I don't know, but that's just my perspective with my own students and how they watch things and how they consume things. To me, that feels like something they need to consider.
If the kids are watching Vampire Diaries, maybe Year One is the way to go.
That's true. Yeah, if Stefan shows up as the captain, they might be in for quite a shock.
Well, I do think we can look at the Kurtzman-Era and draw some conclusions, pretty definitive ones, about, like, what was really successful. And it was Strange New Worlds, right? Like, in terms of streaming ratings, if that's what matters, based off of the limited information we have from the Nielsen Top 10, Strange New Worlds is the most popular Star Trek show made during the Kurtzman era. And I don't think the takeaway from that is people really like Captain Pike and Mr. Spock, and so you should make more Captain Pike and Mr. Spock and number one stuff. I think that the magic of the Star Trek formula is still the magic of the original series. A ship that is on a mission, traveling around the galaxy, visiting planets, having adventures, and that sort of quintessence of whatever it is that Star Trek is still the most powerful version of the show. And that's the thing that gets people engaged and gets people watching. And who knows if Strange New Worlds was even good enough, right? Quote unquote good enough. It was definitely the most successful of the Star Trek shows. Did it sort of gravitate up into that upper level of, oh, this is something that Paramount and Skydance are really happy with? It will have made it sort of 4.6 seasons, which, tough to say what sort of constitutes a successful show in this day and age, but that feels like that probably fits within that category. And it did most of that in a period of time when streaming services and Paramount, as part of that, were being very, we're increasingly recognizing that streaming shows need to have viewers in order to be continued. And so I think that probably does speak pretty well of Strange New Worlds. But I wonder if that's ultimately what it comes down to, is just Starfleet Academy was a great show. Was it too far away from the successful Star Trek formula for people to really gravitate to it beyond the 6 million in a way that they have with Strange New Worlds? And, does that mean for the future we should be looking forward to exploration shows set on starships with a crew of, great characters who are going off and having adventures? I mean, I guess there's been some speculation. I think, Caleb, you mentioned this earlier, that Paramount's interested potentially in de-emphasizing Star Trek on television again in favor of the movies. And there is this movie project, the latest in a long line of movie projects.
We've heard that before.
Yeah, right. From Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley. How does that sit with you in terms of them potentially having this strategy that says, yeah, maybe we're going to do less Star Trek on TV and we're going to put more energy and attention into the movie side of things.
I don't think they are. I mean, it's possible. As I've said many times at this point, I'll believe there's another movie when I'm sitting in the theater watching it.
Yeah, sure.
But if the Kelvin movies taught us anything, it's that Star Trek is never going to be Star Wars. So if they're looking to like bring in the huge audiences, they're never going to get as big an audience as they're hoping for with a new movie.
Yeah.
I could agree with that. But I also wonder if in this period of transition, they are looking at the success of 2009, reviving the franchise the degree that it did, and thinking, how do we get more eyes on Paramount Plus? We need to make some movies that anyone can go see. And then that will drive them to Paramount Plus, rather than the strategy of let's make a show that has wide appeal and not put it on Paramount Plus, put it somewhere else where there are more eyes. That's kind of the only reason I think maybe the movies is the strategy to start.
Okay, I can see that. I do think the fact that they have said they plan to be combining Paramount Plus and HBO. So I do think that's could have a big difference, because I don't know the numbers, but I guarantee more people subscribe to HBO Max than Paramount Plus.
Yeah, I think the movies, if we look back over the last 10 years, since it's been 10 years since Star Trek Beyond came out, almost, in a couple of months, it will have been 10 years. That is the one lever they haven't pulled in the last decade to try and spark more interest in the franchise. I mean, you got to get it right. And that's part of the reason why they haven't, and why there have been so many unsuccessful pitches for new movies, is because it's really hard to get right. And I don't think they've gotten a project in front of them that they have sort of been able to say, yeah, this is something that we feel a degree of confidence will be successful. But if you're sort of looking at, like, okay, Kurtzman tried the kids show, that didn't really work. Kurtzman tried the young adult show, that didn't really work. Strange New Worlds works some, but it's still locked behind Paramount Plus, and so, it's not going to hit as culturally big as shows that aren't. But I will acknowledge that, like, the Taylor Sheridan stuff's locked, a lot of that's locked behind Paramount Plus, and that, like, Landsman, you have to be on Paramount Plus to get Landsman, like, it's not even like that's a huge show that's not even sort of riding the coattails of Yellowstone or whatever, the one that's actually not on Paramount Plus. It's on NBC, and I'm blanking on the name. But anyway, I mean, if a show is good enough, even being on Paramount Plus, it can still resonate really strongly with an audience. And I don't know if Landsman's any good. I've never seen it and don't really plan to, but that is a successful show on Paramount Plus.
A lot of people talking about it. Yeah, I haven't watched it either, but I've heard a lot about it. So yeah, it definitely made the waves.
Yeah, so like, you can have a successful show on Paramount Plus. Now, Star Trek's never going to match up to a prestige drama about, like, most other things, because, sci-fi doesn't sort of have that level of penetration. It obviously makes a lot of money and has a very devoted audience, but it's not the same as like and Landsman's not like a procedural, but like, just sort of a show about normal stuff. If it's done really well, a show about normal stuff's going to be, is going to take the first prize. But if you're sort of looking at it and, okay, you've tried this and it didn't work, and you've tried that and it didn't work, I mean, movies is kind of the only thing left where if you could come up with a concept for a movie that did have some success to it and generated some level of cultural buzz around Star Trek again, in a way that a TV show locked on Paramount Plus is just, a Star Trek show on Paramount Plus just not going to. They've tried so many of them over the last 10 years, and they've never had a Landsman hit. Strange New Worlds is the closest they've come, and Strange New Worlds viewership is like half of Landsman's viewership. Movies might be one of the primary ways to do that, and so maybe shifting energy into movies rather than television, at least in the short term, to sort of try that again, well, it's maybe not such a bad strategy.
And, it just occurred to me, we have a pitch on the table for Star Trek Year One. What brought audiences in. People knew who Spock was. They know who Captain Kirk is, right? Like 2009 brought a lot of new people in because they had heard of Spock before, right? It has cultural staying power even more than Captain Kirk. And now there's a pitch for a new show. What if the way they introduce Year One is not a show, but a movie that then turns into a show? That, it feels derivative in the sense that they've done it before and they're kind of doing it again. But I wonder if that might be the approach, because it certainly made a ton of Star Trek fans when the Kelvin movies came out, right? How many people had kind of put Star Trek aside or not been really familiar with Star Trek, but discovered Star Trek because of the Kelvin movies? Quite a lot.
I don't think you would lock yourself into Paul Wesley and Ethan Peck.
Yeah. That's fair.
Like if you're going to put all that money behind a movie, no disrespect to either of those two actors, like, they're great actors, but I think Paramount's going to be looking for, not necessarily like Tom Cruise level of movie star cred, but there probably does, like, your lead actor, whoever it is, probably does need to be like a known movie quantity as a way of trying to get normies to pay attention to it and go into that movie theater.
Pedro Pascal as Captain Kirk.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, I mean, he's collecting the Infinity Stones of franchises.
Right. I suppose that's true in the current viewership of things. Because, like, one, just getting people to go to the movies now, period, is hard, right? It's much
totally,
harder than it was in 2009. Chris Pine was pretty, I don't know. He had been in a couple of things. He hadn't been in a lot of things. Not a lot of people knew Chris Pine when those movies came out.
I think more people knew who Zachary Quinto was than Chris Pine when that movie came out.
I would agree with that. A lot of people knew who Zoe Saldana was, but
and some people knew who Carl Urban was too, because he had been in various things.
In Lord of the Rings and the Bourne movies, yeah.
And Simon Pegg was like an actual
Right. I actually think Chris Pine was probably the least known of that cast, other than
Anton Yelchin would have been
Anton Yelchin. Known. Yeah, Anton Yelchin definitely would be lower.
But John Cho probably was more well known because of the Harold and Kumar movies.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that they would have to craft the cast, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe Year One's not the right answer then. But I'm just trying to think what would have a wide appeal that would bring a lot of people in, and it has to be unique in the sense that it demonstrates what Star Trek is, but bold enough that it speaks to people and makes them want to come back, right? How many sci-fi movies are there that you go to watch and you're like, yeah, that was fun, but like, do I need another one? And the answer to that, I think, in the current landscape is, there aren't a whole lot of them. I mean, think about the sci-fi movies that have gotten sequels in the past decade. I'm certainly drawing some blanks. So, I don't know. I don't know the answer either, but it's certainly a tough call.
I think it's got to be something new. I think, like, not Kirk, not Spock, not McCoy. That worked in 2009, but you can't just reboot 2009 in 2026. And part of the reason for that is, I think, the sort of, like, cultural cachet of Kirk and Spock. A lot of Star Trek fans are going to hear this and say, Alex, you're an absolute moron for saying this. But I just don't think those characters have the same hold on general consciousness as they did in 2009, which now was 15 years ago from the point at which we are recording this.
17.
Yeah, and so, like, if you're like that's that many years ago for characters who were almost 60 years ago, wonderful, iconic, legendary characters with legendary actors. But, like, I kind of think you're maybe starting with a blank slate in terms of, if you're looking to introduce Star Trek to the world again, it does not need to be Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and maybe it shouldn't be, right? Like, because Strange New Worlds in some ways also sort of proves that, like, it doesn't have to be. Yes, it had Spock and yes, it had Uhura, but it was the most popular Star Trek show, and it was headed by Captain Pike, who, of course, massively iconic and deeply important to the three of us and everybody who listens to this podcast, but, like, for normie audiences is just some guy, right? Like, because 90% of them normies, not Star Trek fans, 90% of normies, probably 99% of normies have never seen the Cage. And so, like, that was hey, you're on a ship called the Enterprise, and you're flying around the galaxy, and you're having adventures, and it's Captain Pike, and who's that? And it was Mr. Spock, all right, well, yeah, no Mr. Spock, and it's number one, who's that, right? And so, even though for us it's like deeply baked into TOS history, that means that we look at it and don't sort of see the differentiation point. I actually wondered if that doesn't point in the direction of a Star Trek movie set whenever it's set, whether it's connected to the Prime timeline or not, who knows, but is ultimately like maybe new characters, certainly new actors, and is taking that sort of successful formula of Star Trek and putting a 2027 kind of cultural spin on it. And that's going to annoy a lot of Star Trek fans. They are probably going to hate that, but it might also be the thing that connects with regular audiences. I mean, for me, this is definitely a be careful what you wish for. All the people who have been so critical of Kurtzman and so begging for him to be removed and, you know, for quote unquote regular Star Trek to come back. I mean, I just hear a lot of that, and it's like, all you're saying is you want it to be 1996 again. And the one thing I guarantee cannot happen is time travel. Like, you're just not going to get that Star Trek that you knew back. And if you got that Star Trek back, I don't think you'd even really like it anymore. It wouldn't be The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Those shows already happened. It would be some new show that was kind of like that. But guess what? That's what Enterprise was, and you all hated that. So, like, all these people who are like, well, the clear solution to the problems that Star Trek faces is just to have a 20-episode season and a 90s-era production design, and all of these same people who are now in their 70s and in some cases their 80s to come back and make these shows. Like, that's the solution? That's not the solution. It's just not realistic. You know, Star Trek's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to become different, because if it is to remain relevant for this, you know, sort of cultural moment, with society evolving as rapidly as it is and technology evolving as rapidly as it is, like, there's two options. Either Star Trek can evolve and survive and be relevant for any particular generation, or we can decide it was ours and nobody else gets to have it, and it dies with us. You know, like, those feel like the two options here. And I think the people who are doing this are doing their best to try and keep it relevant. And the question is just, you know, what's ultimately going to be successful to do that? All right, I got one last question for you guys. You get a phone call and it's David Ellison, and you set aside your surprise about the fact that David Ellison knows who you are and is calling you, but he says, I want you to run the Star Trek franchise. Tell me what the first show that you would greenlight is.
All right, well, I have the perfect plan. I would set this up. It would get a backdoor pilot with the Strange New Worlds episode, Star Trek Vanguard.
Yes.
And it would be the Vanguard novels televised.
Nice.
So that's really interesting, because I think that's actually a really good idea. You have the serialization of more modern television, but you also have this canvas that's already been well established and painted that may make you want to go back and watch more. I think that's another thing that's really hard about getting into this franchise if you were brand new, is you have almost 1,000 episodes to catch up on if you like it, right? And that is a daunting task for anyone. I mean, like, you know, unless you're one of those people that is in love with One Piece and wants to dive into the whole entire canon of it, that takes a very special, right? Yeah, like, you have to be a very special person to want to take that on. So I have to think that it has to be something entirely new. I think it needs to stay connected timeline-wise. I don't know that 32nd century is the right option. Maybe it really is 24th century, putting it somewhere after Picard, but maybe it is focusing on a younger crew, or more focused on citizens of the Federation to some degree. Like, what is it like growing up on different planets? Like, maybe you have a American Horror Story type show where every season is a different locale, different theme, kind of like True Detective.
Brian Fuller wanted to do with Discovery.
Right. Maybe it's something like that, but it's like a Citizens of the Federation where you can relate to a swath of different characters every season, and then at some point there's some interconnectedness to all of them, and you do get recurring characters, but the focus isn't on the same group of characters every season. And maybe that's how you keep it fresh. That's how you bring in new people. It's an anthology show of a sense. I know we've had an anthology of series in this current era, but maybe it really is. Let's stick with an anthology type show and then keep the door revolving enough to where, you know, the ideas are fresh every season and there's new groups writing every season, but under the same general construct or format. You know, I think the Starfleet Academy format worked really, really well. And I think having a format like that, the way they told their stories paired with an anthology, might be the way to do it.
Strange New Worlds in the 25th century for me. Not Star Trek Legacy. So, whole new ship, whole new crew, whole new set of characters, all of them between the ages of 25 and 45, where the level of like legacy-ness to it is equivalent to TNG. McCoy shows up in the pilot. Then you have to wait 4 more seasons before Spock gets there. 2 more seasons after that, Scotty shows up for an episode. And then you hit your first movie and it's Captain Kirk, right? I think, for me, as I've sort of said throughout this episode, that identity of Star Trek as it's a ship and a set of characters and they're exploring just feels like that's the successful alchemy of a Star Trek show. And so do that, but do it in a way where you are getting beyond the, like, your hands being tied to a lot of that existing canon, which the 23rd century is. You're just always stuck in and around TOS, and you're stuck in and around those characters at that moment in time. And because it's these existing characters, you're really tied up in, well, does this fit with what we know of this character? Does this not fit? Like, that's one thing to say about Starfleet Academy. It's mostly brand new characters, right? Mm-hmm. And, like, so there isn't that element of, well, does this fit with this character? Because, like, this character's new. This character gets to be whatever they want to be. And if you moved it, you know, set it a couple of years after Picard season 3 or whatever, you're just in this sort of like space where you can kind of do whatever you want with it. Discovery's 32nd century Starfleet Academy stuff is so far in the future, you don't sort of have to pay attention to that. And all of the other history of Star Trek is in the rearview mirror. And you can just sort of go forward and tell the set of stories that you want to tell. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I kind of think, from having said earlier, a lot of people's prescriptions to the Star Trek franchise is make it 1996 again. Maybe my prescription is make it 1987 again. Not in the perspective of a 26-episode season that works a certain kind of way and has a certain kind of budget. It's got to be a modern show. It's got, you know, in order to be a TV show in 2026, it has to fit within the confines of what we know of how TV shows are in 2026. But an exploration show featuring a ship and a set of characters who are traveling around, captain somebody, commander somebody, you know, an ensemble show, but with compelling characters, just like Strange New Worlds is, but even more sort of unshackled from the way that things are. For me, that feels like the way to go.
I think that one thing that needs to be added to that, if we're going to bring in new audiences, is we need at least 1 or 2 teenage characters that, in the vein of, you know, of Jake Sisko and Nog or Wesley Crusher, right? I think there needs to be someone that younger audiences can gravitate towards who is featured quite frequently. But I actually do think your idea is a great one too. I think that format would work really well, and it does provide the opportunity to bring back old characters for the older fans when necessary. But it isn't the all adult, all the time legacy pitch that, you know, people had been clamoring for. So I think having some sort of teenage presence there, or even college age presence, someone in their early 20s, or, you know, would be really important for a show like that.
Do you have an opinion, theory, or wish about Star Trek that you'd like to share? Email them to me at weeklytrek@trekcore.com, and I might feature your thoughts in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guests, Thad Hait and Caleb Dorsch, for joining me today. Thad and Caleb, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
Best place is to go to my website, tyrannicus.net. That's Tyranicus, where I have links to my social media and podcasts.
David Ellison, you can contact me at RogueMogue, RogueMoGH, Blue Sky, so I can run the franchise. Thanks.
And you can find the show on X at Weekly Trek, and me at Alexander T. Perry on X, and at Alex T. Perry on Blue Sky, Threads, and everywhere else. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And for all your Star Trek news needs, in addition to our extensive media archives of all things Star Trek, I hope you will keep your senses locked to TrekCore.com. Well, thank you, Thad and Caleb. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper. Weekly Trek is a production of TrekCore.com and owned by Trapezoid Media, LLC.